We have been listening to President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking for more than 40 minutes just now. This was billed as a joint press conference between the two leaders. No questions taken at the end of the remarks from each of them just there. President Trump laying out what he called a peace plan for the Middle East, a 20-point plan released by the White House. The president saying that the only people left to accept this plan are Hamas, though we did not explicitly hear from Prime Minister Netanyahu if Israel has agreed to this deal. President Trump said if Hamas does not agree to this deal, Israel would have the full backing to do whatever you have to do in the Middle East. One condition of this peace plan, Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu said, is the release of hostages within 72 hours. It would also establish an international governing body in Gaza, which, according to the agreement, would be chaired by President Trump, along with former UK PM Tony Blair. I want to go right to the White House, where we have ABC's Rachel Scott, ABC Chief White House Correspondent Mary Bruce. Mary, give us your takeaways from this extraordinary event.
Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of answers because, as you just heard, the president and the prime minister, while they announced this, what they described as historic 20-point plan, they refused to take questions here. Of course, while they may be in agreement on what the end of this war should look like, Hamas is not on board. And it's also not clear, I should say, whether Netanyahu is fully 100% on board with this complete plan. That was one of the questions we were going to ask. Also, how much time does Hamas have to respond to all of this? We heard loud and clear from the president what happens if they don't agree. The president saying that if Hamas rejects this deal, that he would then give Netanyahu his full backing to go ahead, in his words, do what you have to do. Netanyahu making clear that he believes that this is essentially the last chance for a deal like this. But again, another question, whether there's any room here to negotiate. Is this truly a take it or leave it deal? The president, though, clearly touting that they have been able to at least get this far, that Israel is broadly speaking on board with this, but a lot of questions about where this goes from here, and also some notable changes here, Elizabeth, from what the president was saying just a couple of months ago when he came before cameras, actually when Netanyahu first visited the White House once Trump was reelected, and the president then said that he believed the Palestinians would likely have to leave Gaza. Now he is saying that they would be encouraged to stay there. Well, what changed his mind? Also, lots of questions about the nuts and bolts here. Who would pay for the redevelopment of Gaza? What does that look like? So we have a lot of broad strokes here, but still a lot of X factors, a lot of questions. The biggest being, what does Hamas think of this, and where does all of this go from here, Elizabeth?
Mary, you were in the room there. It appeared at the end they were considering taking questions, but then that was shot down by both President and Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Yeah, something we haven't seen since that historic press conference with the president and President Putin of Russia. This was billed as a press conference. It's only a press conference if you actually take questions from the press, something that they refused to do, though they certainly seemed to relish sort of toying with us and discussing whether or not they were going to take our questions. But as we said, there is a lot to still be worked out here. And for now, they simply wanted to come out here and tout this deal and not get into any of the nitty-gritty still to come.
Chief White House Correspondent Mary Bruce. Mary, thanks so much. I also want to bring in senior political correspondent Rachel Scott, also covering this for us. Rachel, as Mary said, some notable, the president touting this agreement, saying this is the biggest agreement in hundreds of years, thousands of years. Talk a little bit about what he said about this, but again, where we know this stands between his agreement that was actually reached with Israel and what happens next year, Rachel.
Yeah. And Elizabeth, I think it's important what you are saying here, because this is the agreement that the president says that the United States has reached with Israel. And as Mary just pointed out, we still need to hear from Hamas. This is very much dependent on whether or not Hamas accepts the terms of this 20-point plan that the president has put forward. And he said it himself, that Hamas needs to come to the table and they need to agree to this. If not, then he says Netanyahu and Israel has his full backing to do whatever they need to do. That was the president's words. And so this is a very detailed list of what the president believes and and Israel believes should happen to end the war in Gaza and end this ongoing conflict. A few things that are notable here: all of the hostages would be released. We know this is something that Israel has pushed for. We know this is something that President Trump has pushed for, so much so that when our allies have come out and said that they would be open to recognizing Palestinian statehood, the president has said that our allies should be on the same page of and uniting and calling for the hostages to be released. It was also notable that the president said that no one will be forced to leave Gaza. This is something that has been back and forth. You remember just a few months ago when the president was talking about the United States taking over Gaza at one point. That seems now to have subsided. The president saying no one will be forced to leave Gaza. And then Gaza temporarily being overseen by the sort of board of peace, right, which would be headed and chaired by President Trump, as well as the other former heads of state and current heads of state, including the former Prime Minister Tony Blair. And then that Hamas would have no role in governing Gaza. Again, this is why it's so important that we still need to hear from Hamas on this, what exactly they think about this plan. But I will say, you heard from Netanyahu there, the Israeli prime minister. He was saying that Israel will finish the job. This could be done the easy way or the hard way, Elizabeth.
Rachel Scott there at the White House for us. Rachel, thanks so much. Let's bring in Tom Sufi-Burridge, our foreign correspondent. Tom, give us a sense of how you think this proposed peace plan will play in Israel, and have we heard anything from Hamas either?
Well, it will face a lot of opposition from actually members of Prime Minister Netanyahu's own government, Elizabeth. I mean, far-right members have already been expressing concerns when this has been kind of leaking out and then published by the White House. Look, I think on paper it's a very impressive plan. I think what's very fundamental behind it, and President Trump acknowledged this, is that key Muslim Arab states, European partners who've been working with the Arab states, are very much behind this plan. There's a lot of detail. It talks about, numbers of Palestinian prisoners serving life sentences in Israel, in its jails, who'd be released, 250 potentially as part of the plan, all of the hostages out before that, and then 1,700 other Palestinians being held by Israel since October the 7th, 2023. So, it looks like a very impressive plan, but I think, as we've heard from colleagues there, there's a lot of questions here about, firstly, whether or not Hamas will actually sign up to this. They'll come under a lot of pressure from those Arab and Muslim nations which are on board and are working towards this common goal. But, there are also questions about whether Israel is willing to sign up to some of the principles which are in the text. I mean, for example, in recent days, we've seen European countries like the French, like the British, recognise Palestinian statehood. President Trump seemed to kind of change his language on that slightly and kind of basically showed some kind of understanding why they had done that, whereas Prime Minister Netanyahu was doubling down against that principle. He said in recent days that Israel will never accept a Palestinian state, but those Muslim and Arab nations which are fundamental for this plan are demanding it. So in the 21-point peace plan, there is a clause which basically leaves open Palestinian statehood if everything before it is fulfilled. And there is a huge amount to fulfill before then. Not only this kind of transitional body coming into Gaza, international peacekeeping force on the ground, Hamas laying down their weapons. And that is the fundamental point here I think we should underline. At the moment, up until now, there has been absolutely no signal whatsoever from Hamas that they are willing to demilitarize and lay down their arms. Israel is threatening, with full support from President Trump potentially, to, quote, finish the job if that doesn't happen. But Israel is moderating its language around this issue, saying, look, we will have fulfilled our objectives, destroyed Hamas militarily and politically, but, they're moving away from this idea of finishing off Hamas, which, is a technicality in the language, but I think it's an interesting and subtle point.
Tom, if I could just get a quick follow-up on that, because we did hear Prime Minister Netanyahu say, quote, we can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way. What does that suggest to you?
Yeah, so, we know that the IDF is conducting this major ground operation into Gaza City. That is the main urban centre in the north of Gaza. It's been absolutely obliterated by the war, but there are potentially still a huge number of civilians in that area. Hundreds of thousands have left, according to the IDF, in recent days and weeks since the operation began. But look, we we think, and Israeli officials think this is possible, no one really knows, that some of the hostages at least might be being held by Hamas in Gaza City. There are 20 believed to be, hoped to be still alive, another 28 bodies of deceased hostages. And look, what we've seen, I think, is a slight change now, that Israel is basically opening the door saying, if Hamas capitulates effectively, lays down its weapons and gives up, we will now potentially end that operation in Gaza City. I mean, I think it will be interesting to see what happens immediately. Will the Israeli bombing continue? Will, the civilian death toll continue in that area? Or is Israel going to lay off, ease off? And obviously, all eyes on Hamas. I mean, Hamas is not saying, up until very recently that they've actually seen this 21-point plan. They've seen it now because the whole world has seen it. So it will be critical how they respond.
Tom Burridge, thanks so much. Let's also bring in foreign correspondent Marcus Moore. Marcus, as we've been talking about, a key part of this plan would be the release of hostages within 72 hours of it being agreed to. Are we hearing anything from some of the families of those hostages who've been so desperate for some closure, some answers here?
Yeah, well, Elizabeth, nothing yet from the hostage family forum, but we do anticipate that we would hear from them very soon. But certainly the prospect of any type of deal that will bring their loved ones home is encouraging for them, as these families have been enduring this horror for almost 2 years now. And as we've reported quite often, there have been daily protests inside Israel, family members taking to the streets, demanding that Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli government reach a deal to bring their loved ones home. We have watched some of those protests turn violent in some cases, but certainly a word of a potential ceasefire is exactly what these families have been hoping and praying for. And to your point, anyone who was hoping for an announcement today of a ceasefire, when we heard President Trump saying, if Hamas accepts this, if that, it gives you a sense right now that there certainly is no deal at this point. But it seems like what the U.S. president and the prime minister, the message they were trying to relay is that the ball is now in Hamas's court to bring this war to an end. And to my colleague's points about what's actually in this particular plan, certainly the release of those hostages within 72 hours of an agreement is hugely significant. And we're talking about all of the hostages, Elizabeth, both the living and the dead. And also not only a pause to this war, but a complete end to the war. And that is significant because one of the things that we've heard all along from people in the streets and in the region is that they don't want a pause, that they want actual peace and for this to be an end to this war. When we talk about the broader progress, Elizabeth, in the Middle East, over the past 2 years, as we've watched this war unfold, everyone in the Middle East will tell you, or most will tell you, that in order to make any progress on Middle East peace, they have to deal with the war in Gaza first.
Marcus Moore, foreign correspondent. Thanks so much, Marcus. Let's also bring in retired Colonel and ABC News contributor Steve Gagnon. Steve, great to see you. Talk to us a bit about what this plan, we've just got the plan, the 20-point plan. They've called it 21, but on our paper, it looks like it's 20 points for now, at least. What does this look like on the ground as far as we can tell? We're hearing about this peacekeeping force. What's your initial read of this and what this might actually look like there in Gaza, Steve?
Yeah, I remember, Elizabeth, that the Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israelis had said, look, we're all in because Hamas is not budging, and so we are going to take down all of Gaza. And there was a military operation, and it's planned, and it was planned all the way through to completion, which they estimated would take the rest of the calendar year. So the Israelis have been all in. So I'm wondering what the incentive here for Hamas to surrender now is. It isn't included in the plan, but was there some backdoor discussion about, hey, Hamas leadership, if you throw in the towel now, we'll give you safe passage to some country, because right now there's really no incentive for them to throw in the towel and to surrender, because as Tom notes, it would be a unilateral surrender. So we'll see what happens on the ground. Tom made an interesting point where you think about what happens now. Does Israel continue to bomb Gaza? continue to work their way through the rubble of what's left of Gaza City, or do they begin to lighten up? There is always a risk that they may kill one of the hostages if they continue to bomb that area heavily. So Netanyahu has a domestic political question here that he has to settle. Do I continue at 100% going in through Gaza City, or do I back off a bit and wait for Hamas's response?
Many questions still. Steve Gagnier, thanks so much. We'll stay on.